the protesters, on the other hand, say if you're going to have that embargo, if the Americans have put that embargo on us because we don't have elections, let's have elections and get rid of the dictatorship. And we are seeing right now that these protests would have used to have been unthinkable. The Cuban government is cracking down on dissidents. They are jailing them. There has been an article in Politico just today of a dissident, of someone out there who was already jailed before the protests, saying, we want freedom, we want elections, we want a better human rights record. But at the same time, the American policy that's currently the Biden administration's policy that was started under Trump is one that strengthens the embargo to prohibit remittances from Americans to Cuban citizens on the island. And that's an issue. Same thing goes with how Cuba is not able to import enough vaccine from Russia and China because they're trying to vaccinate their own people.
Right.
So those are issues. And that's where this is starting up. That's where this is what's happening right now. And I did not promote my stream. Quickly.
You mean I had your stream pulled up before you did? Oops.
Let me tweet it. Here we go. Quick tweet. So yeah, that's a thing. When you consider the fact that my grandparents were Cuban exiles who left right as Fidel Castro was taking over. Selfie time. Totally not distracted right now.
Oh, I'm just taking a photo for the stream announcement.
Yeah, this issue hits kind of close to home for me.
Mm-hmm.
It hits very close to home for me.
I hope you know, like, beforehand that a lot of this is going to be you talking, because I still don't really know anything.
Yeah, I sent you the whole thing about Cuban history.
Yeah, and I reviewed most of it.
It's not been free since Columbus. Castro was put into power by Eisenhower because a previous puppet dictator in there, Batista, killed 20,000 people, and we decided he had to go. And Fidel Castro takes over, and in the post-revolution violence, he kills 40,000 people. Oops. There's the fact that we have the reason why the United States keeps Guantanamo Bay in Cuba is because the Cuban government is notable.
I love that there's like a giant movement here supporting their liberation, but at the same time, like, we have a whole ass torture camp. That's not hypocritical at all. Like,
we have the torture camp there because they like torture and they let us put it there.
Let's condemn the Cuban government, but don't talk about our torture facility over there. Don't talk about that.
If they get their revolution, then yeah, Guantanamo Bay is going to have to go. They won't let us have that there anymore.
Yeah, and with good reason.
Yeah, with good reason. It's the fact that nobody wants that. That's been a thing. What's that sound alert?
No, it was I've been pulling up the stream to get the link. Sorry, I was a little behind today. I have to wait for the ad.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's that. There's the fact that this is an island out there that has been promised a lot of things, first by the United States and then by the Soviet Union, that they largely didn't get.
Mm-hmm.
And that the post-war Russian government has not been all that great of an ally, that Yeltsin and Putin have not been providing Cuba with the same amount of aid that the Soviet Union did.
Right. There's
the fact that on Obama's last day in office, under advisement from Stephen Miller, Obama ended the policy of wet foot, dry foot towards Cuban exiles as refugees. There's that. The fact that the United States already went back on that policy back in 2000 with Elian Gonzalez. The fact that there's the fact that Trump strengthened the embargo to block remittances, which people literally need to survive. It's been the whole Cuba is not particularly seen as a good place to be. They're kind of a pariah state. There's the fact that they largely sustain themselves through tourism, but if you have any level of Cuban ancestry and you're under 30, you get conscripted into their military.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a thing. And what the people there want, they shut down the internet there just to prevent people from protesting, but they still continue to do so.
I don't know why governments ever think that's a good idea. Has that ever worked? Ever? It didn't work in fucking China.
Well, China actually did manage to suppress the protests in Tiananmen Square.
No, I'm talking about like with the Free Hong Kong.
Yeah, with the Free Hong Kong stuff, no, they got their way in Hong Kong and they got their way in Tiananmen Square.
There was also a bit, like, shutting down the internet doesn't actually prevent shit, is what I'm saying. Like, I think it was also Malaysia that tried to do it, and I still saw shit. It's almost like the Barbra Streisand effect, but politically. Like,
yeah,
that just makes people talk about you more, and it makes you look worse.
Yeah, well, the Saudi government did that with the Arab Spring, and it actually worked there. So that was a thing. They crushed the protests, and they were successful in doing so. China actually was successful in crushing Hong Kong's independence movement,
which is unfortunate.
Yeah, the people there actually wanted the one China, two systems policy. They were not a fan of the law allowing repatriation to the mainland if you commit a crime that's illegal on the mainland from in Hong Kong. They were like, no, this ends the one China, two systems policy. We want to preserve that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese government crushed them. What's happening right now in Cuba has largely been massive police crackdown on dissidents, massive police crackdown on artists, musicians, and what's happened with Cuba is the fact that they did actually manage to basically create a green economy, pioneered urban farming. But Diaz-Canel, his economic reforms have largely been giving people capitalism, but without democracy, which is exactly what China did in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So they're basically giving themselves the worst of both worlds. And people are usually not standing for that, and they want elections, and it's overdue. It's been 62 years of dictatorship. And because wet foot, dry foot is no longer a thing, and Biden has not reinstated that, nor has he reallowed remittances, there is nowhere for these dissidents to go. Right. Back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan passed a law called wet foot, dry foot, and that was actually a bipartisan thing because the Speaker of the House at the time, Tip O'Neill, decided that he was going to work with Reagan on that because it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. It was basically, we're going to allow the Mariana boat lift in here. Anybody out there who reaches the United States from Cuba and lands in a place like Miami or New Orleans, but mostly Miami, will basically get refugee status. The Coast Guard will only turn you away if they catch you as you're trying to arrive in the United States.
Right.
That's the way it used to be, and that went away because Stephen Miller is a bag of dicks.
Who's Stephen Miller again?
He was the only member of Trump's cabinet who wasn't related to him, who lasted through his entire administration without getting fired or resigning in protest.
So he's a slippery little weasel.
He is absolutely that. He comes across as a whiny little sycophant for Trump in interviews. And he was the guy responsible for kids in cages when Trump decided that policy was too cruel. He instituted forced hysterectomies at the border. He's that guy.
That shit annoyed me on so many levels that it's literally not even funny. I would kill for a hysterectomy.
Yeah,
I would murder for one. And they're just like, nah, give them to the immigrants.
Yeah, it's a whole my body, my choice thing.
Right. You should never be forced. You should never be forced into it, but like you should also be able to access one if you want it.
Yeah, it's one of those things out there that was done to them basically to prevent people coming into the United States from breeding, because
Anchor babies.
Yeah. It's that, and he believes that the United States is better off without immigration, and that immigrants will never be true Americans. Back in high school, he was known for basically kicking somebody he once considered a friend to the curb because his parents were Mexican immigrants.
Whatever happened to this land is your land, this land is my land? And not that there aren't problems with that too, but like, we're supposed to be a land of immigrants. That's the whole thing. We're the melting pot, you know?
Yeah,
that's supposed to be the cool thing about our country.
That's supposed to be. Miller does not believe that.
But he's white, right? I presume.
He's white, but
his family came from immigrants.
Yes, they were Belarusian Jews. They what he did was the fact that
nobody's saying the country should be without borders. It's Quakes. Literally no one. You are making that up.
Yeah, nobody's actually. There are some people out there who want open borders, but nobody's calling for no borders or a border without Canada.
Open borders is still borders. Like, there's still a process.
There's nobody out there who's seriously calling for a North American Union, and here is why. Not just Mexico, but also Canada have massive problems with child sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen Miller is just a massive douchebag. He is... What he did is... Well, he's not going to be Trump's running mate in 2024 because he burned bridges with him after the Capitol riot. But he currently has a legal foundation that supports immigration restrictionist causes. When his grandmother died of COVID, he specifically said that she didn't. He falsified the death certificate mostly because she wrote a family tree of his family, saying that his ancestors were refugees, and he does not like refugees. So you have a Cuba policy that is a massive break from the Reagan up through both Bush administrations.
Mm-hmm.
Reagan administration or both Bush administrations, which was actually a pretty good policy and a pretty humane policy, and one that I think we should extend to people from Venezuela and Syria. Because when you're dealing with, and I think Yemen as well, since it's a lot, especially since we're no longer siding with the Biden administration has decided that we're not siding with any faction in Yemen. And we just don't kind of want anyone to win because every side there is pretty horrible, and there's nobody out there who can win in that conflict who's not going to become a threat to us. So let them in. That's my position. I have very strong pro-refugee views. I have always held very strong pro-refugee views. I don't want to kick people out of this country, and I think that I think that there's largely been a lot of misunderstandings on what Castro and Che stand for, and I think that a lot of Americans have a very skewed view of that because Che Guevara shirts were heavily associated with the anti-war movement back when,
that's just all because of propaganda, though, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of it's the fact that people like Che Guevara shirts because of the what happened because
that's part of the propaganda though, because when you repeat a lie, especially a lie about history, enough times, it ends up almost becoming truer than the truth, or at least to most people, unless you do the research into it. Che got heavily associated with like socialist revolutions, basically. Despite the fact that he was kind of like pretty fucking shitty as far as I'm aware. And also not really ultimately socialist, if I am recalling correctly. I don't know very much though, so don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I actually do because I'm Cuban American. Che was very strongly socialist, but he was also extraordinarily homophobic.
Was he actually socialist, or like was he like authoritarian left? Because those are entirely
authoritarian left.
He's a tanky.
Yes, very much so. Fought for pro-Soviet revolutions in Africa after burning bridges with Castro during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Which, if you want to know what happened, Che Guevara wanted to nuke the United States. He wanted a nuclear first strike against America, and Kennedy was looking for any reason to nuke Cuba and the Soviet Union if they dropped a bomb on us. Nikita Khrushchev was the guy who diffused that conflict. He's the guy we should be putting on T-shirts, because "We will bury you" is actually a pretty cool quote, if you're going to be honest. He's the guy out there who saved the world in that. Che was the guy who almost got the whole world blown up. Yeah. Castro was considering kind of sort of siding with him. Khrushchev was like, "No, you're not doing that. We're not going to drop a nuclear weapon."
If
the Americans
Castro's thinking about siding with you, you may have gone astray at some point.
Yeah, the United States, the Soviet Union almost got into a nuclear war for that guy. It was that was not a good conflict. That was not a good conflict. The United States had more nuclear weapons at the time. Kennedy ran on a platform known as the Missile Gap, falsely claiming that the Russians had more than us. Kennedy actually thought the Russians had more than us. Then he actually became president and saw that we had more than them. He still wound up ignoring everything that Dwight D. Eisenhower. He ignored everything that Eisenhower said in his resignation speech about the military-industrial complex, and started basically building up an even bigger nuclear arsenal to destroy the world over 10 times over, which was capacity that we still have to this day.
I honestly almost
wonder... The Russian response to that was to build higher yield hydrogen bombs that would destroy things over a much larger area than our nukes would. They call their model of warhead was known as the Tsar Bomba, which let me look this up. Blast radius 22 miles, with a mushroom cloud that towers 200,000 feet. That's what Soviet-era nuclear weapons were capable of doing. You do not want to think that Che Guevara was necessarily the good guy in that conflict. The Cuban government have absolutely been have never actually been particularly a good state really worth emulating.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of it has largely been that way. The Bomba sounds rather solid at Walmart.
I was just thinking as I was reading that, I'm like, that would actually make a pretty good band name.
Tsar Bomba. Yeah. But that would be like something. That would be like a heavy bro step DJ. That's what I see is like a heavy bro step or a gabber DJ with that name.
Nah, do reggae.
Maybe if it's raga or dancehall. But yeah. You're looking at a country out there that's had a horrible record from Freedom House for years, and has largely been they have very much for a pretty long time been, until Venezuela ended elections, they were the only dictatorship in the Western Hemisphere. What happened was that when the Cold War ended, every state in the Western Hemisphere became democratic without a Soviet Union. The Contras definitively defeated the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And most of the American-backed dictatorships, like in places like Brazil, wound up becoming democratic. Brazil became a democracy. Colombia became a democracy, albeit one that they got their democracy back. Chile got their democracy back, and they did it by Pinochet asking people, do you want to keep the dictatorship or do you want the democracy? And he largely lost because people didn't like him because he was known for executing dissidents. So you had a Latin America that was strongly democratic for a very long time. Colombia's Brazil is real and not just a meme. That's great. No, Colombia's democracy, I think, it's still relatively authoritarian, but they've been trying to deal with the rebels. They have created a peace plan with most of them. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia have largely disbanded, which is good. There have been concessions. There are still largely radical liberation theologians in Colombia who still want to keep the revolution going. And then the government is still largely sort of has a shitty human rights record, but it's getting better. Venezuela's been engaging in democratic backsliding. Brazil has actually been engaging in democratic backsliding, and both of those things are very bad.
Right.
And especially when you hear some of the rhetoric coming out of Bolsonaro's mouth, and
it really reminds me, a little while ago I was watching one of those like mega debates that people host, and somebody was actually arguing that you can't, if something is voted in democratically, it can't be undemocratic. And I'm just sitting here like, what? Like,
that's
you can vote in undemocratic policies democratically.
You can.
That's often how that happens, actually.
The enabling acts actually ended Weimar Germany's democracy and created the Third Reich. You can totally do that. That's exactly what democratic backsliding is. There's been a lot of when you deal with a lot of democratic backsliding, a lot of it isn't necessarily truly unconstitutional, but it's stuff like the Indian government starting up anti-Muslim pogroms. Islamists over in Indonesia rallying against the rights of Christians and Hindus. Those types of things are absolutely still movements within a democracy, but they are inherently anti-democratic movements. Same thing goes with the Japanese government's treatment of Koreans, of the Korean Japanese. I mean, those may not necessarily be democratic policies, but they're happening within democracies, and that's what democratic backsliding is. You're looking there. I think that only Hungary so far has really, although I'm not entirely sure, I haven't looked up exactly what's happened in Nicaragua, but I think only Hungary and Venezuela have truly become dictatorships. Yeah, I do know more about foreign policy stuff because I'm a foreign policy junkie.
Purple was like, well, who's the guy monologuing? I'm like, he's not monologuing, I just don't fucking know anything.
Yeah, I'm the one out there who says if you want to understand foreign policy, you should read things like foreignpolicy.com.
I've said it before a million times. I'll probably say it again a million times. I
national interest.
Spend so much time trying to figure out what's going on here. That already takes a lot of time, and I live here. I don't have the capacity to learn about other things in depth, and so I just try not to talk about them myself. Because
I'm the international relations junkie here.
Right.
And I know a crap ton about it. And especially when it comes to Cuba, that's something out there that I know a lot about. And yes, there's going to be the whole
I just try not to talk about stuff I don't know very much about personally, unless I preface it with a lot of I think it's this way, or I'm pretty sure, clear indicators that I don't actually know what I'm talking about, which is, I feel, more socially responsible than a lot of political commentators. A lot of them just talk out of their ass about whatever, and it doesn't matter, and they will talk about it as an authority, and I'm just like, I know what I do not know, and I'm not going to tell anybody I do know what I don't know.
Walmart logistics? What?
Star Bombas and Walmart, let's do it. Democratically voted in.
Yeah, well, technically there's a case for that.
Listen, you're not a real libertarian unless you want everybody to personally be able to own a nuke.
Yeah, technically, there is, under the originalist interpretation of the Second Amendment, under the infringement of militia clauses, that's necessary. That technically is.
I might be a libertarian, but we don't fuck with right libertarianism. Okay, those people want to fuck children. They want to fuck children and own nukes, and I'm not okay with that.
Yeah, under an originalist interpretation of the Second Amendment, yes, but that is not Obama Party 2021. Great, that's awesome. But technically, that's a thing. Except I'm not a fan of originalist interpretations of the Constitution. I'm more of a fan of case law interpretations because under originalist interpretations, you'd have to throw out things like the Juan K. Mark ruling in 1896, which would be horrible for immigrants, and you'd have to throw in a whole lot of civil rights laws from the Warren and Burger courts that I'm not comfortable with doing either.
Listen, all I'm saying is if you go by an originalist interpretation, and you actually mean like what they meant originally, you should not be in support of civil rights because those bitches wrote all men are equal having slaves.
Yeah, originalist interpretation is not necessarily the best. Yeah, not being able to kiss the Wendy's cashier and the lips coach on Marxism and communism. Yeah, it's like that. There was nothing around sexual harassment laws back when the Constitution was drafted, but those things out there have largely been decided by the courts. I believe that sexual harassment was that.
I mean, wait. We can't talk about this. This is CRT.
Yeah, I think that was under the Burger courts when that was decided. But I don't know.
Listen, Crab, I just said we can't talk about it. It's CRT. God.
But yeah.
We can't admit America's racist. People might not like America then.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that's reasons to dislike originalist interpretations. I think that I still hold to an originalist interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, largely because the courts have ruled that you can't prove that you were spied on through electronic surveillance because it's classified. But at the same, and I think that actually no, that's still not originalist either, because they said papers, and it's what I think that they would have done if they were alive today. But because people have largely switched to electronic communications, I think that yes, that we should not be permitting that. I think the Patriot Act should be repealed. I think the NSA should be focused entirely on foreign communications. But at the same time, I still think that there should be reasons under a FISA warrant to spy on domestic extremists. If they think they're actually planning something, yes. If someone actually has a direct plan to go out and do something, and it's already been proven that other people have ratted them out and said, yes, this person's not just talking shit, they actually have a plan, then yes, put them on the do not fly list. In those circumstances, yes. I think it's warranted, but those are limited circumstances.
Just let me quietly reminisce for a moment about all the people who performed in the insurrection and then threw a massive baby bitch fit because they were put on the no-fly list after being identified as having been a part of the insurrection. Those meltdowns were hilarious. Like, what did you expect? I'm gonna do a terrorism, but I want to be able to fly home. Even though, like, a decade ago, I would have been definitely like, we should put all terrorists on the do not fly list. That was definitely my position 10 years ago, but not anymore because it affects me.
Yeah, if you're going to actually, like, in the 1830s, yes, Chief Black Hawk was still a free man after engaging in the Black Hawk War. It's a terrorism because Trumpy Daddy says so. Yeah, you see, but the times have become a lot different now, largely because people didn't have the same types of weapons in 1830 that they have today. And that Black Hawk was actually totally willing to negotiate with the government. He lost, even though the courts took his side. So, yeah. There was that. I think that that's the only real precedent for it, and I still think that ruling should be considered legitimate because the Sauk had no right to be deported into then Mexico since they were legal U.S. citizens and should have been allowed to remain in Illinois, and that's why Illinois to this day is still one of the few states with absolutely zero reservations. And that was Andrew Jackson basically using executive orders to override the courts, and I think that's a bad precedent. I think that that's probably the only time that you'll actually catch me using an originalist argument.
Originalism's for pussies.
Yeah, I strongly believe in case law. You don't know which had to be on. I keep switching. The one with 2 cams. There you go. Yeah, I largely.
I can see both. They're like literally right next to each other on my screen, so it really doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, they didn't have back in 1830. They had cannons, but they didn't have hand grenades. They had bolt-action rifles, but they didn't have semi-automatic handguns. It's the fact that if you had, they had single action revolver. When you have a single action revolver or a bolt action rifle, you're going to do far less damage. Oh, thanks for the follow, Circle. Athena Realism, how's it going? Yeah, you had very different weapons back then during the Black Hawk War. And even a double action revolver or semi-automatic handgun is far more lethal weapon than a bolt-action rifle or single-action revolver.
Hey, can I really quick cut in and be and ask you to put my name in your stream too, so people know whether they're coming from you or me, that we're both here.
Exactly my favorite, lol. So yeah, that's a thing. So I largely dislike originalist arguments because I think that times need to change, that laws need to change as time goes by, and that the Constitution is an evolving document. So, but anyway, back to Cuba. There is the fact that American foreign policy is largely it's taken a very dark turn under Trump, and I think that Biden hasn't had the chance to really change it. So he hasn't had the time to change it, and yeah. Yeah, it's the
I'm
fact
dying.
That I don't know if Biden will. Yeah, I don't know if he will either, especially because it looks like the Cuban government is largely not necessarily going to still stay at the same state. They're going to largely have a regime change, and that means you're dealing with a completely different state entity, which means that every country has to largely revise their policies towards Cuba because they had just had a revolution, which hopefully won't be as much of a clusterfuck as Egypt was, because if people who want to know what happened in Egypt, you had a new revolution every year during the Arab Spring. It was one of those things out there where they voted in the Muslim Brotherhood and then decided they didn't like them.
USA is shit. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, they were pretty bad about that, with about just like constantly having revolution after revolution, because they're like, we want democracy like Tunisia. Oh, we voted for the wrong people. Let's have another revolution. So Cuba, hopefully, if they actually have a democratic revolution, it will actually be one out there that has decent human rights protections, and you won't have another revolution after that. It's ridiculous, but I think that there should be refugees. If people care, they should write to their representative. Why? Because your representative in Congress will gives you the opportunity to ensure that Cuban dissidents can flee the country and come to the United States.
Destabilizing socialist regimes is basically a national sport at this point. True! Very true. Unfortunately. we scope them, we fucking 360 no scope those things right out of the fucking sky as soon as we fucking know.
Technically, France and Brazil, we permitted those socialist regimes when they went socialist. We allowed that
because they still worked with us.
Yeah, because they were still willing to work with us. It's when
the second a socialist country's like, I don't know if I want to deal with America, they go, hey CIA.
Yeah.
Install a dictator. Thanks.
Yeah, that's usually what happens. It's one of those, and even then in Haiti, I'm just like, I'm not even sure which country was even responsible for hiring those mercenaries. And it very well could have been other Haitians. And I'm just like, is it the United States, was it Venezuela, or was it other Haitians? Or was it Cuba? Wait, which country did it? I don't know. It's like a game of Clue until you actually get, until you actually can nail which suspect actually did it. You can pin that down and narrow it down. It's like one of those. Could have been anybody. It actually, Colombia is also a suspect too. it's one of those. I think Venezuela is the most likely one, but I still have no idea of who was even responsible for that. It's fun to watch though. It's just like being like, oh, who assassinated him? But yeah, write to your representative, because that is how you will actually get real change to occur. If you write to your representative, then yeah, that's how you'll actually get a genuine Cuba change. Because if you want to support the protesters, absolutely write to your representative, say, please allow remittances, please allow refugees to come to the United States. Those are the things out there. Quit copying my arm gestures.
I'm not. I'm playing with my lights. Sorry. I am listening, but I was explaining fill lights because my fill light.
If you're not a
colored.
U.S. citizen, then you can do what you can in your own country, because there's not really a block. The other countries don't necessarily block flights to and from Cuba. So if you live in another country, then yes, you can just write to whoever in your country basically crafts policy to basically allow refugees to just take flights over to your country and be like, finding...
Can I just say, the idea of writing to your representative is really fucking annoying to me, by the way. Every time I've bothered to send an email to my representative, I've been literally completely ignored.
My representative back to me if he agrees with me.
To be fair, I live in Kansas, and I'm a leftist, so yeah, not really super surprising. Because even our lefties are like, I don't know if I care that much about people's welfare.
I don't want Trudeau to show up in Cuba and brown face thinking he's part of the culture. That's great.
Oh, shit.
I don't know, but I hope that on his next visit to America, he winds up partying with Ralph Northam. But yeah, that's a thing. With Cuba, you're trying to revise a policy there that would hopefully, let's see, that if things wind up taking a turn for the worse, then yes, I think the United States might need to take unilateral military action if Cuba keeps cracking down on protesters. Largely because A, we already have a naval base there. B, we don't like their state. C, there's actually a compelling humanitarian reason to do so. I don't just say, let's go out and invade countries out there that we don't like. No, that's stupid. I don't think we should necessarily go out and invade North Korea. But if there is a compelling humanitarian reason with civil unrest occurring, then yes, that there is absolutely reasons to do that, because the state no longer has the consent of the governed.
I am personally, generally, and mind you, once again, I don't understand shit about foreign policy or anything, but based on what little I do know, I'm generally against interfering with other countries unless there's like a very extremely direct thing that we need to handle, like people bombing their own countries or some shit like that.
Doesn't have
because I feel like we fuck it up more than it would have been every single time.
Yeah, Cuba, there actually is a compelling humanitarian reason in this case. Cuba does not have the capacity like Syria to bomb its own people, because they largely can't afford it, but they have been deploying police to do so.
I just don't know if we're the ones that should be handling it, I guess. Because America, not a great track record at fixing anything at all.
And, well, the people there, the Cuban police actually have killed people. We know at least one. The last time I checked, there's likely more because they.
I'm not saying that nobody should do anything.
Yeah,
I'm just
out of the press. They kicked
America.
The press out.
Do we really need? Does America really need? We fuck it up. We'll fuck it up. We will fuck it up. We will fuck it up.
I disagree, because look at it at the U.S. track record in former Yugoslavia. What we did was we helped build democracies out of Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
How's that Iraq democracy going?
And also Kosovo. So that happened. We largely did that.
We can't even build a democracy out of. Hold on. We can't even build a democracy out of our own system, and we're supposed to be a democracy.
Well, Vietnam, we were not trying to build a democracy in Vietnam. We were standing up for first a dictator, and then after we deposed him, a military junta. Vietnam is actually different. That's a whole different case. We were not trying to build a democracy there. We did try to build we're not trying to build a democracy in Afghanistan. We were trying to put the Northern Alliance in power because they opposed the Taliban. And basically siding with one dictator against another dictator. Iraq, yes, we did try to build a democracy, but a huge part of it was the fact that the Sunni Arabs did not want to share power. They wanted all the power for themselves. They were used to being in charge. So they did not necessarily consent to being democratic because under Saddam, they held all the power. They didn't want to lose their privilege.
I forgot that you changed butt to booty nipples.
Yes, it's the best thing that I can do with butt spot. Booty. It says booty nipples on there. It's great. It's the best thing that I can do because I'm just like, what's the most possibly obscene word that I can think of? So yeah. But yeah, no, I think in this case, yes, there was actually a compelling humanitarian reason for it. Even though South Korea was not democratic at the time, the United States defending South Korea in the Korean War eventually paved the way for them to become a democracy. American aid to Taiwan to keep the Chinese out, even though we were providing it back when Chiang was in power, and he was not democratic in the least, that eventually led the way for them to become democratic. So in those circumstances, yes, American military force has absolutely led to democracies. We built democracies out of some of the former Axis powers and other countries out there that were also invaded by the Axis. Yes, and we built democracy. And yes, it's true that Japan was previously democratic. So was Italy, so was Germany, so was France, and we also installed democracies, and so was Norway, and we also installed democracies out of former authoritarian states over in Denmark, Sweden, and Belgium and the Netherlands.
What was the most recent one that we successfully installed that could actually be referred to as a democracy?
Tunisia.
What year?
Around 2010.
Okay. If you say so. I don't know. Once again, I don't know shit about Dick as far as foreign affairs goes. I remember the catastrophe out of the Middle East trying to establish democracy there, which didn't
Iraq
work
and Libya
at
were
all.
kind of failures.
And I know that we fuck up a lot of countries with military. And I know we fuck up a lot of countries with military intervention, so I'm just very extremely skeptical.
But in this case, the people want democracy. They're protesting for democracy. There is a compelling humanitarian reason to do so. In this case, yes, it's worth it. We already have a naval base in the area, so there aren't going to be the same type of logistical problems that we had in Iraq in terms of getting us into the country, where we had to make a pit stop in Saudi Arabia. You're dealing with us being able to go right from Florida and Puerto Rico right into Cuba. It would be easy. It would be quick. Diaz Canal.
Okay, but how many civilians are we killing on the way there?
Probably less than the Cuban government will.
Fair enough, I guess. I don't know.
Canal will probably flee to Venezuela. And
I guess my main point is, if we handle it well, fine. I just don't know that I personally have faith that we will. I don't have a lot of faith in military intervention on the United States, or from the United States.
I grew up watching what was going on in Liberia and former Yugoslavia as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we did actually get Liberia to become a democracy. Granted, that was multilateral and under the UN, The UN proved to be completely useless in former Yugoslavia, and we largely did that unilaterally. Yes, I don't think that the bombs Clinton dropped on Serbia should have been depleted uranium warheads. I don't think we should have gone nuclear, because Serbia now has one of the
we're America. We love our nukes. Remember that those 2 that we dropped on that one country? What was it?
Japan.
I don't know. Some little island off of the coast of China.
Yeah, we did it a second time in Serbia, and in Serbia it wasn't as catastrophic because they were quote unquote tactical nukes, but they still have some of the world's highest rates of cancer there. So I don't think we should necessarily do that, but so I don't necessarily approve of that part. But I do think we should have absolutely dropped something on Serbia in order to make sure that they could not blow up. Like that's not the Serbians could not blow up the Kurds, so that they could not use their air force, or not the Kurds, the Kosovar refugees. They were technically ethnically Albanian, but they were people of Kosovo, of present-day Kosovo. Yeah, we should have absolutely stopped them from bombing their own people. Yes, I think that Trump largely messed up in Syria. I don't think he was a very good military commander, and I think that betraying the Kurds and pulling out once al-Baghdadi was dead was the wrong decision. I think we should have tried to partition Syria, because the Kurds largely liked us. The Free Syrian Army largely liked us. We were actually trying to help them fight ISIS, and we should absolutely have stayed in Syria to basically partition North Syria as its own country so that Bashar al-Assad could stop bombing his own people. Yes. I think those are circumstances in which there is a compelling humanitarian reason. Do I think that...
I'm not arguing against all military intervention either. I just, growing up, in post 9/11 America, I saw the government and the military intervention stuff fuck up so consistently and so badly based on fucking lies at that I just don't have a lot of faith. I just don't.
Yeah, well,
which is not to say that I'm not arguing against all military intervention. Clearly there are times where we have helped. Those memories are very vivid and very core. They were baked in at a very early age. So it's very difficult to get around that cognitive bias,
Capacity has been crippled. And that's one of the few things that Trump actually did right, even though I don't think he necessarily did it well, because he still threw the Kurds under the bus. I think that northern Syria should basically secede, and because Kurdistan is a region that's a nation without a state, I think that they deserve a homeland in North Syria, and I think that the Free Syrian Army people should still also, who would largely be slaughtered once al-Assad heads north. I think that Biden should head back there and try to just offer a partition and to build up a peace deal. I think that those are the things out there that should happen. I think that I'm about 5 years older than you, so I know that the stuff out there that I remember are things out there when America did it well, when we did the Good Friday Agreement, when we basically built a democracy in Liberia.
I just don't see why we have to be the world police. It kind of annoys me.
Because Russia and China will do it, and they won't necessarily.
Yeah, but for instance, you said that Cuba was really easy for us to access and stuff, right? Great. Maybe our intervention is a little better there, but that's all. Syria and all that. Once again, I'm saying nothing about whether or not we should militarily intervene there. I don't know enough. I don't really have an opinion. I think, if I remember correctly, the Kurds are socialist and good, and that's great. But other than that, I really don't fucking know anything. But there's a whole bunch of European countries that are also supposed to like democracy, who are a lot closer. Why couldn't they be the world police this time?
Because the United Kingdom wants to make itself isolated from the rest of the world and just do things their way. And Germany and France are far more scared of Russia invading the European Union and staging invasion of Finland or Estonia.
Or at least, like, in conjunction with the U.S. or something. Like, I hate that we're, like, the people who are like, we're going in and we're saving everyone, even if we fuck up a lot. Don't worry, guys. We're the hero. You know, we're the main character. I'm like,
well, here's the thing. The United States largely does that in ways because we don't have a scary neighbor like, well, actually, no, Russia's kind of our neighbor across the Bering Strait. But they're not going to mess with us in the same way that they would with Europe.
But if Europe had backing with America, we would be able to be less the sole arbiters of world peace or whatever it is that we think we are.
Those bridges were also burned during the Iraq War because France and Germany didn't want to participate in the invasion of Iraq, largely because France and Germany had a lot of under-the-table deals with the
because we did a bad thing, the rest of the world's like, nah, fuck America, even if you're doing something right this time.
It's also the fact
that sounds petty.
They also
can we, as a world challenge, stop being petty when it's too important to be.
All right, I was gonna say France and Germany it turns out that they were part of the UN's oil for food scandal, that they were engaged in a lot of illegal deals for Iraqi oil, which is a big part of the reason why they didn't take part in the invasion. So there's that issue that drives a wedge between the United States and the European Union. And then, of course, the fact that the UK doesn't really want to play ball with the rest of with other countries in general. So, and the fact that we can do unilateral intervention because we're one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, so we basically can do whatever the hell we want without consequence, and so can France, so can Britain, so can Russia, so can China. Those are countries out there that can pretty much invade whoever the hell they want. The Chinese typically prefer soft power and to do bad things within their own territory.
Look, I get Russia and China bad. Russia and China definitely bad. Yeah. I'm just annoyed that we seem to be the only ones willing to stand up to them at all. And, like, I understand that's partly because we're the only ones that can, like, rival their militaries, because, like, we overfund it like crazy. But it's just very, like, fucking annoying, you know? Like, these other countries must also realize that these countries are bad. They talk about them as if they're bad a lot, just like we do. So, like, maybe team up? I don't know. Like, it seems very simple to me.
Than carpet floor. It's easier to vacuum if you have a wood vacuum cleaner, which I do.
It really feels like...
wood and one setting for carpet.
It really feels like they're just kind of being petty cowards based on how you describe why they won't work with us.
Yeah, it's the fact that France and Germany liked their oil, and they didn't take part in the invasion. That's literally why it was not the United States falsified intelligence to engage in a blatant land grab. They weren't taking a good they pretended to be taking a good humanitarian stance and were largely proven vindicated by history, but they were largely operating through self-interest because unless you're Switzerland, all foreign policy is largely grounded in imperialism.
Oh, yeah.
Even though people out there state that North Korea is also an example of an anti-imperialist state, that's not necessarily true because South Korea, if you look on Google Maps, looks weird because South Korea has laws stating that they cannot do the kind of GPS that Google Maps does across the rest of the world because they're scared of a North Korean invasion. And they have good reason to be because they're still they have agreed to unify with North Korea.
As far as, like, imperialism goes, no one is free of that sin. No one. Which is not to say it should be excused, but I'm really skeptical that anyone who claims that some country has no imperialist history, I'm really skeptical about how within reality they live.
Yeah, I was gonna say South Korea's weep. No, South Korea's not weep shit because
Purple's just trolling.
Yeah, I'm fully aware. I was going to explain the history is that Toyotomi Hideyoshi led a failed invasion of Korea, and then Imperial Japan in the 20th century led a successful invasion of Korea, and neither of which were necessarily good occupations. So the South Koreans will be like, we're not weebs at all. we don't like the Japanese. And the Japanese response is, you do that, if you keep saying that, we're going to repress Koreans in our country that much more. Yeah. The heck of star bombs, yeah, in the early modern period. Yeah, it totally had those in the early modern period. My point is that I still think outright that Iraq was a horrible example, but that humanitarian intervention had a very good history in the 1990s. I think that people out there give Reagan and Bush 41 a lot of shit over their South Africa policy, but there absolutely were private discussions behind closed doors for South Africa to end apartheid, first by becoming a whites only democracy and then by becoming a true democracy. That is actually stuff that actually happened, and Botha was a total asshole, but de Klerk eventually ceded power to Mandela. And that was still American soft power at work. There was also U.S. intervention in Panama to depose Noriega and build a democracy. That actually was a successful invasion that did impose a democracy. We did it in Germany. We did it in Japan. We did it in the places out there that those countries occupied. We put pressure on the South Korean and Taiwanese governments to democratize. And they did. I think that there's absolutely situations in which the United States invading Cuba would work out well. And quite frankly, I think that let's look at a poll. What percentage of Americans have a high opinion of the Cuban government? Let's see. Is this? Oh no, that's not what I'm looking at. Which party Cuban Americans are voting for? Opposed to, do they want to say engaging with Havana? Do they mean militarily or diplomatically? Okay, that's okay. That 2/3 of Cuban American voters in Florida say that they're against against re-engagement of diplomatic relations with Havana. Okay, that's different. That's showing that there is. That used to be 51 wanted better relations. Yeah, this is the only poll that I can find on the Hill of what Americans think about it. But in general, I'm guessing that Americans are less likely to want to deal with Cuba. The country out there that would give Cuba the most financial aid at this point would be Venezuela, but Venezuela's economy has collapsed because the problem with communism is if the guy in charge can't manage the economy, then your centrally planned economy is going to suck if the person in charge is incompetent, and he won't give up power. Maduro will not give up power to Guaido at all. And even if it's driving Venezuela into the ground, and they're the country out there that theoretically would provide the most aid to Cuba. I do think outright that there should be at least some sort of military intervention, depose of Diaz-Canel, let him basically take some sort of asylum deal in some country that we don't like. Some country we don't like. Could be Venezuela, could be Russia or Syria, could be North Korea. Just a country we don't like. That was be willing to take him and oversee elections. Once we toppled them, bring in UN peacekeepers to babysit and ensure that elections go smoothly. It could work because you actually have the consent of the government there. The people out there who are largely in favor of the Cuban government are largely older. They're the elderly. The young people want democracy, and they're the future of the country. And that's largely a change that's happening, because right now Cuba is not going to remain communist anyway, because Diaz-Canel has been engaging in capitalist reforms. You're going to wind up with a hybrid system like what China has. What would have to change about the U.S.? The U.S. nation goes from average overweight to underweight. When I kind of try to move from being 100 from.
I mean, I know what I would change about the U.S. like overall.
Well, the United States, we're just getting out of a horrible recession. Yeah, we're not necessarily economically
just getting out. Wells Fargo like started doing the similar moves to how they did before the last economic collapse. We might be on the verge of another one, to be honest, especially because the stratification of wealth distribution. I think stratification is the right word there. Is way worse. Honestly, we've been like having an economic crash every like 10 years basically my whole life, which kind of means that maybe we should change some things. But like, for instance, I would, if I could just like wholesale enact laws as I pleased, which is not how America works, but I personally advocate for if you require it to live, the government should be providing it at no cost to you. I fully believe that if it's on that, like the lower 1 or 2 tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it is the government's responsibility to cover it for you. I don't see what the function of the government is if it's not to allow everyone to have a chance to thrive. And in order to thrive, you need to have your basic necessities met. I don't think that, so like basically that's housing, food, water, clean water, healthcare, including mental health care, including dental, okay.
Well, what happened was the fact that in 1997, Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, and that's what got us the 2007 recession. 2020 recession was the fault of COVID. And yeah, if we're on the verge of another one, because right now we're caught in a recovery bubble. Bubbles are bad. And oh yeah, I also forgot. Right after Bill Clinton repealed Glass-Steagall, literally a year later, we had the dot-com bubble burst. We put Dodd-Frank in so that we wouldn't have another thing like the dot-com bubble burst or the 2007 housing crisis. And you wouldn't have one industry making really poor decisions, dragging down the whole economy and crashing the stock market. We put Dodd-Frank in place. Trump tried to repeal it, but it was too popular of a law, and people wound up. The government exists to tax you. Well, yeah, cap, like yeah, pretty much. The government exists to tax. That's pretty much that's well, literally and Thomas Hobbes in the shortest version.
And like I said in the chat, like the government might exist to tax you. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's not what the government should be doing. Taxes in and of themselves aren't evil. It's just that they are really easily misused in the system we have, and we don't have a ton of ways to actually, like, prevent people from misusing them or punish them for misusing them.
What happens is that
if taxes are used to enable citizens to be the best citizens they can be by taking care of all their base needs, then it becomes a system that feeds itself, and you have a healthier your citizens are healthier, they're happier, they're more well educated, they're making more money, which means the government gets more money to help more people. And it's just a better like way of functioning overall. Like I don't understand these people who are like, no, there needs to be poor, starving people. Like, do you just want to feel better about yourself that you're not poor and starving? Because like I don't see why anybody would wish that on people.
Well, a lot of it is the fact that you have people in rural communities who are white who believe that those types of policies aren't designed for them, but for like people of other races. And that they're not interested in supporting anti-poverty policies because they believe that it's a policy for them and not for us.
But it's for everyone. Like, the policies that I advocate for, when I mean free shelter, I mean for everyone. When I say free food, I mean for everyone. When I say free healthcare, I mean for everyone. I don't mean just poor people. I think that's stupid. I think that's really, really, I mean, I understand why we enact these policies to help specifically poor people. I get why we do that. I just think we should do it for everyone, because that way it helps everyone.
Yeah, but let's put it this way. But if you have a lot of white people out there who say everyone benefits other races more than me, so I don't care if I'm poor and I'm starving.
What you're saying at that point, though, what you're saying at that point is that these other races are struggling more on average. You're just admitting to being racist at that point. Yes, you're admitting that you want you're acknowledging that racist systems exist, that they harm people of color, and that you want it to stay that way.
Yeah, it's a lot of there's a lot of resentment in those rural white communities, especially in the South, where you have people out there who will vote, who are struggling under the current system, but will largely vote to make that system crueler instead of kinder, because they're just plain racist. And they want to know that that they want other white people to benefit more, even if they themselves are not benefiting, and they don't care what happens to their own kids.
So, Veldrin, the racism of lowered expectations is not a phrase I like to use, because when it is used, I often see it used by like centrists and people on the right who think that because you acknowledge that a system explicitly works against people of color, very obviously, if you actually look at the statistical data that we have about almost everything, means that there's this idea that if you acknowledge that those systems exist, that it will convince people of color that they shouldn't try because they're never going to get out of it, which is not at all the point of bringing up that those systems exist. The point of bringing up that those systems exist is to try to prevent them, from continuing to exist. It's to point them out, go, hey, that's bad, we should change that so that people of color do have more equal footing. And again, none of that means that people of color cannot succeed, but there is mountains of evidence that it is harder for them to achieve a reasonable amount of success, because there are a lot of systemic barriers to that, and because of how we treated them in our history, we haven't made up for that. We have done nothing but continue to harm those communities, basically, and eventually, stuff ends up repealed, but, you still get instances, even modern day instances, of really blatant systemic racism. Like that voter ID law in wherever it was, that, the Supreme Court of the state, I think it was a state, had to, crack down because they were like, you're just being racist. Literally, that was only a couple of years ago. Well, Veldrain, that's the thing. You say that the system does...
Let me explain, because I have something here to say here. My father actually worked with disadvantaged black youths. I was a public school teacher, and in a lot of those communities, the kid doesn't necessarily have much of a chance of actually landing a decent job. And here's why. Because if you're dealing with communities out there where the father is in prison, the mother is an alcoholic, the kid doesn't really have anyone raising him. And
well, even then, even assuming that there's
to somehow succeed and to get into college and take AP classes.
Even assuming that, you don't have, an alcoholic single mother as a black kid, right? The neighborhoods that people of color tend to live in are usually really low income. And because of that,
they lack public transit, which helps people find jobs.
Because of that, that means that that generally means like the housing is lower cost, which means the taxes that go into education are lower, which means schools are not funded. You know, they're typically not getting a great education. They're typically not getting very good nutrition, partially because of food deserts, partially because of, once again, a lack of funding in the education, because that goes to the food there too. And when you're not well nutritioned, you have even less capacity to like learn and survive and thrive, because your body is like freaking the fuck out trying to like just live. It's really really hard to like condense just how fucked up everything is about this, because there are so many interlocking systems that, while none of them necessarily like currently like explicitly like have like a black only sign or whatever and are like 10 times worse than the white thing anymore, there's a lot of like little things that are still in the system that we haven't gotten rid of, that all kind of combine together to make this big ass shit stick that basically people of color get beat over the head with. You know, it's the education system, it's the way we redlined and how that still affects how things are today. It's the lack of ability to get housing loans for a really, really long time. It's the criminal justice system and how biased it is. There's so much going on there that explicitly really put people of color down. And you're right to some degree that it works against people who fail to integrate with society. But here's the thing.
I have something to say to Beldrain here. When you say that, you're completely forgetting the fact that, again, when my father mostly taught with underprivileged black kids on the south side of Chicago, it's not about, quote unquote, being a hoe. It's about not seeing yourself having anything resembling a decent life, not being sure if you'll live till 30, so just doing whatever the hell you want, because you don't see a future for yourself anyway. That's different. You're still that's completely a response to systemic oppression.
Just because, I know because go ahead. Sorry, I have a lot to say.
I live in Chicago, and I know that after Rahm Emanuel got caught in some scandals around Homan Square and the shooting of Laquan McDonald, his response was to and that he was being seen as kind of the poster boy for systemic racism. What he did was he looked at the CTA, saw that the CTA itself was systemically racist because it was not providing rail service to majority black communities. And what he did was he extended the CTA red line further south and went on a big construction project to basically better black people's lives on the south side of Chicago. There's the fact that you can't just tell somebody, oh, get a job, do something with your life, when the way that white people in Chicago have long had much better access to mass transit, where they can just go out and get a job. If you're black, you will likely not be able to get a job as easily, because even after the red line expansion, there's still the CTA still doesn't necessarily go to those underprivileged neighborhoods, so it becomes a lot. And when you do that, you still wind up with backlash from white residents out there who don't necessarily want to see criminals mugging people on the CTA, because if you do that, then you have to fund police more to put more of them on the CTA.
And that's like a self-fulfilling cycle too, but like in a bad way, because poverty is the number one cause of crime. So if you don't try to fix the poverty, the crime never gets fixed either. But if you're like not fixing the poverty because of the crime, you're just like having, anyway, sorry, back to what I was saying though. So you're right in saying that the system works against people who fail to integrate with society. But the problem with that is it is kind of a racial issue, just like it's kind of it's a minority versus majority issue in general, whatever that minority happens to be and whatever the majority happens to be. Because the system is built to work for people with majority identities. It's built to work better for people who are straight, for people who are cis, for people who are white. It just is, partially because of our history and partially because of still current existing discrimination within the system. And so it is partly a race issue. It just is. If you actually look at the data, it's literally undeniable. I don't know how to explain that anymore. And yeah, you're right. We're trying to tackle it a little bit with like diversity hiring because it helps kind of make up for the back foot that people of color were put on. But even so, in order to be qualified for these really good jobs, you have to have a good education. And in order to have a good education, you need to have often like a stable home. You need to have food. You need to have like, you know, like there's so much that goes before even getting to the point where you can qualify for the job that people of color do not have equal access to in general. As far as the people being promiscuous thing goes as well, a lot of that is also a lack of proper education, especially sex education. We treat sex like this taboo thing, and we treat it like we treated alcohol a really long time ago, where we kind of like just don't talk about it. Just don't talk about it. Just don't talk about it. Just don't have sex. Period, paragraph. But that's the thing. People are gonna have sex anyway. We know this. And the way to prevent children getting pregnant is to teach them how to have safe sex. Because they're gonna do it anyway. Just like adults are gonna do it anyway. Teach them about condoms. Teach them about birth control. Teach them about consent. Actually teach them about the anatomy. Like, just be frank with them. It's not that hard, and it does help. Period. Also, you won't be able to get it. So you said if you won't be able to get a job if no one taught you how to fill out a job application. You won't be able to keep a job if you have no work ethic. I think most people know how to fill out a job application, but again, that goes back to the lack of education in poor neighborhoods, which are often black. Period.
Yeah, and if you say right off the bat that to get a good education, you need to have a country where education
and as far as no work ethic, you're assuming that black people don't have work ethic. Are you fucking kidding me? People of color in general have a much stronger, at least in my experience, a much stronger work ethic. They just can't get good jobs because there is systemic barriers in the way, or not can't, but often are find themselves unable to due to systemic barriers. And that's the thing. People act like it's just one moment in your life that they're comparing this to. Like, it's not. It's your whole life that affects this. It's where you were born. It's how wealthy your family was. It's, you know, how much general wealth there's been, you know, over the past few generations. It's, you know, like, it's, does your family have good jobs? Like, you know, it basically starts at the beginning of time. Like, if you go back far enough, but like, we can literally trace, how systemic barriers affect a single person throughout their life back a few generations to figure out how good a chance they have at succeeding, whatever you think succeeding is. Like, you just think about it and examine it. Like, we live in the now, but the now has been influenced by everything that happened beforehand, you know?
Yeah, but here's the thing. When you deal with finding out job applications, a lot of times employers wind up with tons of job applications, tons of applicants, and they look for any reason to not hire somebody. And when you deal with a lot of employers require a 4-year degree, which not everybody can afford, in very specific fields, and sometimes they require more years of experience in a programming language that may not have even existed. And what happens is the fact that those jobs go to people out there who deliberately lie on their applications. So you wind up punishing people for being honest, and you have and that you have employers want unrealistic expectations of new employees, even for entry-level positions. And those are things that, well, when you say large employment gaps,
who's more likely to have a criminal record? And why are they more likely to have a criminal record?
Well, when you say large employment gaps, you're talking about people with disabilities who employers may not want to hire.
Yeah, there's also like
actively looking 4 years. That might be why there's an employment gap. It might just be bad luck.
Right, or like you took time off to take care of a sick family member, or you were sick, or like just because you have an employment gap doesn't mean you don't know how to do the job. Poor people are more likely to have a criminal record. And who is more likely to be poor?
Yeah, when you say poor people are more likely to have a criminal record, you're also forgetting that I just explained what happened with mass transit in Chicago in black neighborhoods, where it becomes a lot easier to join a gang because if you say go out and get a job in a place where all the windows are boarded up, all the jobs have moved out, all the factories have been closed for a decade, what jobs do you want people to get if they can't get onto a train? If they can't afford to buy a car? It's just like that kind of stuff just doesn't really work. It's much easier to join a gang and have at least some money in your pocket, even if it's give you a criminal record, than to just be able to
like poor communities,
call up an Uber.
Poor communities, again, which are often people of colored communities, like, you know, there tend to be like black and Latino and Asian and stuff like that. They being poor because of how the system is set up, because we are very capitalist, love that for us, disadvantages you in so many ways. And I'd almost call them invisible ways because people don't notice them, but they're very visible. We just don't like look at them for some reason or acknowledge them for some reason. You know, poor neighborhoods have a lack of transportation. Poor neighborhoods are often run down because they're not taken care of. Poor neighborhoods have poorer education because they don't have the money to put into it because of the way we do education with their property taxes, which is dumb as shit, by the way, in my opinion. Super dumb. Literally built to keep people in a cycle of poverty, but okay. Like, being poor makes it so much harder to actually do anything at all. And I say this as somebody who's been poor my whole life, and the only reason I am not on the street right now is because I'm dating someone who is very generous and lovely and lets me stay in their apartment without having to contribute to rent, because otherwise I would be homeless.
And when you say when you say that like poor people are more likely to have a criminal record, you also have to deal with poor white communities who are usually rural, who have massive issues with the meth trade.
Right, and but like
that's also an issue. You're dealing with communities out there that largely where a lot of times when you deal with rural decay, you're dealing with places out there with factories that have closed down. People can't just go out and get a job because the factory, which was employed most of the people in the town, is gone.
Right, and I'm not saying white poor people don't also have systemic boundaries. They do. They just, being a person of color on top of being poor, this is what intersectionality is actually about. It's about examining all of the ways that being in a minority or being in a disadvantaged position, in the case of being poor, because I don't think being poor is actually a minority position, but whatever. It's about examining how those intersect and make it that much harder on the person, because it's multiplicative. You know? Nobody's saying give up, though. Literally nobody.
Nobody's saying give up. I think what we should do is provide more funding for
the system systematically advantages people who are in minority positions is not give up because there's no way you're like ever going to succeed. It's just saying, hey, it is that much harder for people in these positions to succeed. Yeah, because it is. That's just fact.
I think that we should do more for employment services and placement. I think we should try to get corporations to sign off more on cooperating with employment agencies on placement. Yes. Do I think that we should offer more funding for education? Yes. I think we should provide more more opportunities to people, yes. Do I think that, yeah, that's going to be expensive? Actually, no, trying to work with corporations for placement.
Hey, if the government just actually takes care of the first like 2 tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, less people would be poor. Period.
Yeah, I'm saying right off the bat. But here's the thing: what happens when state governments?
Why is that white culture? Why is that not black culture? Please tell me. Explain it. Why is that a culture? Like, why is that culture there? Oh. What made it happen like that? Please give me some reason that black culture is like that doesn't have to do with the fact that they were systematically disadvantaged for 200 plus years in this fucking country. Because that's why.
Now, let me state outright that's I don't even consider paying attention in school and getting good grades to be white culture. There's also a thing about nerds. If you listen to your parents, you're lumped in with Hispanic kids. If you get really good grades, you're lumped in with Asian kids. The whole nerd stereotype, the whole nerd geek stereotype is still in a way racialized, and white kids just have that much more of a safety net from family. And they're more likely to wind up if they fuck up, they can wind up getting their family.
We're talking in generalities.
We're talking in generalities, yes.
By statistics. Yeah. There are always going to be people who are able to rise above the barriers that are placed in front of them. There's always going to be people who, no matter how many barriers were removed from their path, like say you're like a rich white kid, there are some of them that are just going to fuck it up no matter what. But, on average, statistically, like what we're saying is true. It's a combination of past systemic racism on top of but the glorified criminality is because of the racism. It's because of the history of how black people were treated. Like, those things aren't different, actually, like, at all. The glorification of criminality in the black community is because of how they were fucking oppressed in America.
Alright, and I also like your safe sex joke, Pale Purple. But here's the thing. When you deal with glorified criminality, you're failing to understand that even though Jim Crow is gone, black people still face all the same systemic barriers that Irish, Jewish, and Italian communities faced during the early part of the 20th century, which led to criminality and its glorification, in which people like Al Capone, Bugs Moran, Meyer Lansky wind up becoming folk heroes. Like, it was a thing out there that really stayed until the 1980s. 80s was more of a game changer, where you started having people in those communities start to really take tough on crime, law and order positions because they were upwardly mobile. And that's largely because of the GI Bill, and the fact that was meant to be. And I think of the GI Bill mostly benefited white veterans.
Like, if you really want to, like, understand, even if you end up with different conclusions than I did, honestly, but if you really want to know how this stuff formed, I would highly encourage you to look into the history and the whys of the history, because I don't want to, like, make it all super simple and say, it's all racism, everything. But, like, a lot of it is because of past racism that we then didn't fix and often made worse, or just, like, made more incognito but didn't actually change anything. And, like, I used to be, like, talk to me 4 fucking years ago. I was definitely one of those people who's like, systematic racism isn't a thing, all this stuff can just be explained by being poor, stuff like that. It wasn't until that I, like, really actually started looking into the history of all of this. Like, it is partially because, once again, yes, part of the reason that black people run into so many barriers is partly because they're poor, but the reason they're more often poor than white people is because of the past racism that we didn't do anything to amend.
We did things to amend under Johnson, but we didn't.
Not Johnson started taking really, though.
What happened was largely the fact that Bill Clinton started not wanting to really work with Jesse Jackson, and not wanting to wanted to go ahead.
We definitely didn't do enough to amend it.
And you had things out there moving, you have an Overton window that moved further to the right on these issues for a long period of time. Because you had a lot of people, you had a post-Cold War status quo in which it was one of those, everybody wants to be capitalist, so let's be even more capitalist.
Hey, Veldrain. Democrats bad too. Let me blow your mind. Democrats bad too. Democrats bad too. Less bad. Right, but bad.
At the same time, when you say, Democrats have been in control for decades, you're also forgetting the fact that there's still a ceiling to how much people are willing to be taxed.
I don't think it's true that Democrats have been in control for decades anyway, though. Like, anything the Democrats have tried to do when they have been quote-unquote in power has been fucking blockaded by the Republicans. So is that really in control? Who really has the power there? Like, but also, even if that's true, Democrats suck ass. So
I think that what he's trying to say here is the fact that what he's talking about is places like Chicago and San Francisco and Austin, which pride themselves on being liberal, find themselves as being. It's not so much that as somebody out there who lives in Chicago, people in those communities are usually white people in those communities are usually NIMBYs. What they mean by liberal is that they want to pay more taxes for better schools for their own kids, but it's everything else, so they may not necessarily want to benefit somebody else's kid.
Which is dumb and selfish and stupid anyway.
Yeah, they'll wind up still voting for people with a D by their name because they're still pro-education. But a lot of those schools wind up having very different funding, but by neighborhood.
Democrats can be racist too. No arguments for me. Veldrain, as far as Democrats not being less bad, being equally bad to Republicans, the Republicans openly host neo-Nazis among their ranks. Neo-Nazis versus people who just don't help good enough. One of those is worse. One of those is worse.
It's the whole Kevin McCarthy not choosing not to officially censor people for fundraising with Nick Fuentes when it was, what was the guy from Arizona?
Marjorie Taylor Greene, motherfucker. Like, she believed in Jewish
it wasn't him this time.
Lasers. No, like, I'm just pointing out another one, because there's multiple. Like, one party is okay with neo-Nazis being a part of their group, and one party says that they want to help, and then often don't.
Gosar, that's the guy.
Most Republicans are like most people, they hate being called racist. That's not what I'm saying, though. There are Republican politicians today in our government that are fucking neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
That Republicans presumably voted for.
Yeah, if Paul Gosar is raising money with Nick Fuentes and is not being rebuked by Kevin McCarthy, that shows that there is something fundamentally wrong with the GOP at this point.
If the Republicans weren't literally openly hoping neo-Nazis in their fucking party as politicians that they put up on the board, maybe you could convince me that they're equally bad, but they're not.
Here's the thing. I never said that all Republicans are Nazis. I never said that. I said Paul Gosar has those ties. That's a difference. That is a massive difference.
I am also not saying that all Republicans are Nazis. What I am saying is I don't hear the GOP condemning Marjorie Taylor Greene when she talks about Jewish space lasers. Like, standing by while fascism and neo-Nazism is within your party without condemning it, without saying that's bad, without trying to, like, rid your party of it, it's just questionable. You know, it makes you a little bad. Because it makes you, if you're not okay with neo-Nazism at that point, why aren't you doing anything? Like, either you're okay with it, or you don't think it's important enough to care about. And both of those are bad.
And here's the thing. Even though Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are ranking members of the Progressive Caucus, Pelosi has basically taken both of them to task for things out there that they have said that are arguably anti-Semitic. But when when Paul Gosar or Marjorie Taylor Greene run their mouths or have questionable connections to people, or when Matt Gaetz decides to invite a Holocaust denier to the State of the Union, I forgot if it was to the inauguration or the State of the Union. I think it was State of the Union in 2018. McCarthy is not necessarily holding them to the same standard that the Democrats hold their own to. They're not necessarily saying, hey, that's out of line, here's an official censure.
You get, like, occasional, like, what is the word, like, fake, I don't stand for this is, like, from, who's the one Republican that actually stood up against Trump, like, twice?
There were a few. Do you mean commentators or politicians?
Politicians.
Do you mean Jeff Flake?
No.
Do you mean after the riot? Do you mean after the riot that I think you're thinking of?
That wasn't the only time he stood up and was like, condemn Trump, but that was one of them. Who the fuck was it? Ted Cruz?
No, I think you're thinking of...
It was one of the few that I actually fucking know the name of, so like...
was it Liz Cheney? Liz Cheney, you thinking of?
No, it wasn't Liz Cheney.
Adam Kinzinger?
No, I'm sorry. I'm really trying to remember.
Mitt Romney?
That might have been it. But, like, there's like, a few times that individual Republicans will stand up. Yes, I interact with the chat. That will stand up and be like, I don't agree with this. I think this is genuinely bad, and I don't want my party to be like this. But those are so few and far between, and they never actually end up doing anything. They almost always end up falling right back in line.
They fall back in line because they don't want Trump to endorse a primary challenger against them.
Right. But that's
how they lost the House in 2018 was Trump.
But by doing that, they enable the fascism and the neo-Nazis that are within their own party that they were supposedly condemning for like 2 seconds before they fell back in line.
Yeah, it's the fact that Trump was just like, if my own party's going to criticize me, then I'm going to intentionally lose the House in 2018. And that they're largely scared of being condemned by the guy out there who's still the front runner for 2024. They're scared that he's going to win. Realistically, yeah,
that's a problem.
One of those things where, and what happens is the fact that conservative media winds up basically, conservative media and right-wing Twitter accounts decide to bash Dan Crenshaw for condemning the Capitol riot. They attack Liz Cheney for saying that she believes that Biden won fairly. It's again,
Sanders is a socialist.
What? It's again when people when the GOP try to at least be accountable, they wind up dealing with a media environment that basically is so desperate for views that they'll pander to the worst parts of the base and say all sorts of things, even if they aren't particularly true, about people in Congress to basically say, "Oh, you're a rhino if you do this."
Does rhino mean something that I'm not aware of?
Republican in name only.
Oh.
They'd be like, "Oh, that you're not a real Republican if you do this."
If the Republicans actually stood for half the stuff they claim to stand for, I probably wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem with them. If they like actually stood for like freedom and liberty and like shit like that, I probably wouldn't mind them so much.
Cute animal.
But like, when I see what they're doing, they're definitely not upholding their own ideals, basically ever. And the effects of what they're doing are so heinous that, like, I'm not saying every Republican out there is racist, but when you see, if you actually look at the effects of Republican policies on, like, people of color and you still choose to vote for them, mind you, I'm aware that a lot of voters are just uninformed. Like, I get that. But if you actually are aware of the effects the policies have, because you have looked into it, and you still choose to vote for them, it does seem a little bit like maybe you at least support racism, and that's not good, you know? Trump is not more of a Democrat than the current president? What?
What do you mean by Trump?
Also, Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, that's largely Sanders out there saying that. It's the fact that the Democrats are largely divided, but they allow themselves to agree to disagree with each other. You don't have that same level of fear of being called out by the current president or
Democrats will blast the current president, as they should be able to, without fear of losing re-election. Republicans aren't, and that's a problem because that means the Republican Party is whatever Trump wants it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump doesn't want good things on the whole.
It's the fact that when they say that, they're saying, when the Republican Party says that they support free speech, but at the same time, you have how many people in France has Trump himself canceled? It's the fact that if you start trying to,
I believe in free speech, but don't point out that there's racism in the system because I don't want you to. I'm gonna sick the police on you.
Well, the things out there that Trump did that were bad were things like trying to repeal people's health care.
What does Trump want that is bad? How about the whole border situation?
Yeah, the border situation.
Just for one example off the top of my head.
The fact that Trump his COVID response, that was also pretty awful.
Yeah, the COVID denialism, that literally saying people should inject bleach into them, but then backing off of it once he realized that was a really fucking stupid thing to say. But not backing off of it by saying, oops, I made a mistake. Backing off of it by saying, no, that's not what I was saying at all. You did, though.
Yeah, it's the fact
there's nothing wrong with having a strong border, except that it harms our country in literally every way possible and doesn't benefit us at all. I don't know how loud that was, but...
Yeah, there's the thing that there were... I think that if you look at the immigration policies of Lyndon Johnson and Ronald Reagan, you see that immigration grows GDP.
Yep.
It is largely good for the country. I think that
you know what's really helpful to our country? Having effectively, making it easy to both get into the country and get out. Because you know what happens? Less immigrants stay here. They leave of their own accord when their visa is up because they're not worried about being able to get back in if they need to. Part of the reason we have such a problem with immigration is because of how strict our fucking policy is. Just look into this stuff. Actually look. I don't understand how people can be this ignorant if they actually, really look at it. Look at it. Just look at it. Just research it. It's not that fucking hard, and it's very, very clear. Every single motherfucking economist in this goddamn country, save maybe a few who are more Republican than they are, genuine economists, who identify as Republican more than they identify with their field of study, literally says immigration helps our fucking country. I don't know what to tell you, man. You can't deny reality like this.
Yeah, you can't just be like, oh, yeah, that's not even a thing. I mean,
I'm not saying let every Tom, Dick, and Harry with a criminal record in. There should obviously be at least some looking into people who are coming in, admittedly. Make sure they're not a terrorist, But generally speaking, most of the people who want to come in aren't terrorists. And they just want to come here and work, during which they will be paying taxes, which they will not benefit from, so that benefits the actual citizens of this country way more. And then they leave, and they go home to their family, because they're not worried about being able to get back in if they need to for money again. Literally, that's how it works.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I don't think that we should have ICE going off and just deporting people for...
You're right, capitalism does love paid undocumented workers. Capitalism is a cancer on society.
If you're going to ask, I think that when it comes to undocumented... I don't think I should be deporting people out there for their visas expiring. I think that we should make it easier for people to renew visas and to have a bit of a waiting period for the government to get people's renewal papers to actually arrive, so that we don't start sending people back off to places like Mexico or Russia or China or India, where they will benefit another country's economy more than ours when they wanted to stay here in the first place.
Wait, Felding, didn't you come in complaining that people were commies or whatever, and now you're agreeing that capitalism bad? I mean, yes, capitalism bad, but like, pick a lane.
Yeah, you see, I think outright that that capitalism is probably a system out there that largely works, but I think outright that we should absolutely still rein it in.
Works. How many financial crises have we had over the course of our lifetimes?
That works when it's regulated. It's largely the fact that I think that we should absolutely start regulating things a bit more than we do.
Personally, I think that
Citizens United.
I think in my lifetime, what I would really like to see is a switch more to like market socialism, where we still have markets for like stuff we don't need, but the government does provide the stuff that is literally required to live, basically. Because I think that would, it would be better for every average citizen out there, like just any old random fuckhead on the block.
Belgian, did you just...
You said capitalism loves paid undocumented workers. We were talking about underpaid undocumented... We were talking about immigration. Then you say capitalism loves when it's illegal. Yes, because capitalism sucks.
I actually think that capitalism works.
Capitalism causes this problem you are complaining about! You dumb fuck! Like, I'm trying to be nice here, but like...
Yeah, I think
you are being purposely ignorant at this point. You really are. Look into the stuff you talk about.
If you actually make the argument of, I still want to keep a capitalist system, but I think we should regulate it a bit more so that corporations won't be as predatory.
I don't think regulations work all that well. Not that I'm against regulations, but I just tend, because corporations tend to write the laws. I don't think it works very well.
That is a flaw with the Citizens United ruling.
Well, it's a flaw with the system, because the Citizens United ruling is part of the system.
Right, but I think that's going to be a thing until you can get more liberal justices on the court.
Right. No, we should definitely regulate corporations. I just don't think that that's the end-all, be-all solution. I think we need, in order to effectively make it much harder for corporations to actually, like, exploit us and the environment and all of that, we have to have a citizenry that's not so worried about losing a job because they literally won't be able to survive, that they can't do anything because they're literally, like, stuck having to work to survive, you know?
Well, counterpoint to that, which is that socialist countries out there like the Soviet Union and contemporary China, or even Mao's China, have been horrible polluters. I think that regulated capitalism winds up being the greenest, and that even if it's a socialist system, I still think that a social democracy, like
market socialism, would be a social democracy.
Would be fine. Okay,
that's what I'm advocating for, effectively.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
like basically, government makes sure that you're fed, you're maybe you're clothed, you're housed, like the basics for survival. I personally would like to expand that, like to, making sure public transportation is very robust, making sure the internet is freely available, because I think those are kind of literally required to live nowadays, but that's kind of beside the point. Mostly I'm worried about like food, shelter, clean water, education, healthcare. Those are my big 5. I would just expand it beyond that. And then, like, for the fun stuff, corporations can, relatively speaking, because I still want them regulated to make sure stuff is safe and, they don't pollute so much and yada, yada, yada. But, relatively speaking, they can go nuts. If it's not required to live, go for it, markets. Markets don't really work for stuff that's inelastic, though. Like housing, like healthcare. It just... when you literally need it to survive, capitalism knows that it can exploit you even more because you need it to survive, And that's
out there, which are actually the greenest.
Not good.
They're usually the top 10 of them are all in Europe. The United States somehow is not.
And most of those countries have extremely strong unions that basically take the place of what I'm referring to would be the government's job in my ideal system. Increase taxes to support social safety nets, empower unions for more workers' rights would be a step in a good direction. Still use I agree. Yes, I'm in support of higher taxes to support a social safety net and empowering unions. Yes, I'm not saying we have to get rid of capitalism now. There are many steps from where we have to like a good system without capitalism. Many steps. We will not see the end of capitalism in a healthy way within our lifetimes. But I think it's better to try to move away from capitalism, because capitalism is literally built on exploiting people and resources for profit. That's the whole point of the system. Exploit people and exploit resources, people being a resource, but that's beside the point, in order to make the end goal of profit. And I don't think profit is a very good goal in mind when we're talking about like the survival of the planet or people having a good life and stuff like that. I think there are more important things that we should probably be focused on. Certainly more important things that the government should be focused on than profit. I don't like that the government tries to protect profit at all costs. That shouldn't be the government's job.
Well, here's the thing, is that I think outright that we could wind up, that when you say empower unions for more workers' rights, well, here's the thing, that's hard to do under the Citizens United ruling.
True.
And that you would need for, say, Alito or Thomas to have a severe health crisis, where they would need to resign for that to change. You'd need to have that, and then have, well, Scalia wrote the Citizens United ruling, he's dead, and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are both still a bit to the left of him. They're more in line with the ideals of Anthony Kennedy. I think only Thomas and Alito are the really strong conservatives, and they're also the oldest member. Them and Breyer are the oldest members of the court, and Breyer's likely to retire within the next year anyway.
That's so off topic from Cuba.
This has gotten very off topic from Cuba, but I feel like I said what I had to say, which is that
doesn't it always devolve though?
Tyrannical, and I'm going with what the chat's talking about because I'm monitoring. So gas guzzling SUV.
Hey, who do you think puts out those ads that like consumers should take control of their own environmental impact? Who do you think does that? Who do you think that is?
Consumers don't have much of an impact on it. It's mostly the government. Right.
But who tries to push that idea? It's the corporations. It's the corporations that are pushing that, because then we focus more on what we can do and less on what they should be doing. You're right. Corporations, I think, what was it, like 300 corporations contribute some ridiculous percentage of the total, like, carbon emissions or whatever. Yeah. Like, you're right. Corporations absolutely are responsible for this. But they purposely put out individualistic propaganda in order for us to focus inwards instead of on them, instead of putting pressure on them. They're doing that. That's bad.
Here's the thing. Individual consumer choice around buying an SUV doesn't impact the environment as much as what the government and what corporations largely do. Mm-hmm. That you largely have to deal with institutions being the ones that actually really do the polluting.
You're right, Beldrain.
It's a lot of it's large farming interests. It's the fact that red meat and inadequate emission regulations cause more pollution than your SUV does. Than every SUV on the road does. It's not an individual choice thing. It's a lack of regulations thing, and the fact that we need an EPA that will push for stronger regulations that will conform to what the Paris Accords want. I think that when people out there complain that if we started getting the Department of Defense to run greener, I'm sure that you'd have Republicans, or all that Republicans have to do is complain that Biden is being quote unquote woke in trying to make the military quote unquote woke. What by trying to make the government greener? Well, no, it's the fact that the Navy and the Air Force contribute to a crap ton of pollution because of crap emission standards, and the fact that we don't regulate corporations in the same way. That's what's causing climate change. Yes, China has a larger carbon footprint than us. Yes, there is a single country that is worse than us when it comes to
we're number 2.
We're number 2 in this. Because we aren't pulling our weight.
So, current capitalism is a runaway train that has been created by both parties. Yes.
Yes, that's a thing.
Yes. Democrats, bad too. Democrats are bad too. Democrats enable capitalism. About as much. I wouldn't say as much, but they definitely enable capitalism about as much as Republicans. The thing is, Republicans are all gas, and at least the Democrats press the brakes sometimes. Sometimes. Or at least add less fuel, you know?
Well, the Democratic Party has still leaned further to the left under Biden than it did under Clinton and Obama.
Because that's not because of Biden, though. That's because of Bernie.
Because of Sanders, yeah. Because Sanders started moving.
I mean, not just because of Bernie, but Bernie was definitely a big piece of that.
Yeah, it's because you have a voter base out there that wants policies that are further to the left. You also have to deal with the fact that by and large, Clinton and Obama would have had policies out there that were more in economic policy, at least, that were more in line with Eisenhower and Nixon than, say, Truman or Kennedy or Johnson or Carter. That's a thing. Yeah.
Neoliberalism sucks. Yes, I agree. I completely agree. Good to know that you're on the anti-capitalist side of things, Veldrain. I'm glad you're coming around. I don't think you're actually coming around, but... I don't think the Democrats are good at all. I think they advertise that they virtue signal while Republicans are like this. The problem doesn't exist because we ignore it. They're both doing the same thing. They're both neoliberal. You're right about that. They are both neoliberal. They both enable like the bad aspects of capitalism. I completely agree.
Go that much further into things like wanting to quote unquote starve the beast.
I also agree that Democrats often virtue signal rather than actually helping, but that's because the Democrats aren't actually left. They don't
and
actually.
Part of it is the fact that you have people who are scared of a party out there that goes too far left, who are largely in purple states.
I wonder why. It's almost like there's been decades and decades of propaganda against socialism, conflating it with the horrors of like the Soviet Union and China, even though those countries aren't socialist at all. And there's plenty of examples of a mixed economy with socialism and capitalism existing in harmony that are really good examples, like that are way better off than we are. Like, we're so inundated with the idea that socialism bad and and communism bad that nobody actually bothers to fucking learn what those systems do or are supposed to do, like their ideals, because obviously any system can be implemented poorly or call themselves something general, that they're not.
France is still an example of socialism done right. They have they've made it so that they've gotten almost completely rid of fossil fuels for the purposes of generating electricity. They're around I think the last time I checked, they were around 75% nuclear and also invested heavily in renewables for the rest. And if you notice, they rank as the 5th greenest country in the world. That's how you have a modern economy that still manages to do things. The problem is the fact that even in the United States, even our unions wind up supporting things like oil pipelines because they create jobs for workers. It's the fact that you have you have a country out there that largely has bought into anti-environmental and climate change propaganda, which 97% of meteorologists don't agree with.
So, Veldrain, you're right. Once again, we're not like entirely disagreeing.
That's crony capitalism.
Right, but crony capitalism is almost inevitable in a capitalist system because of how it works, basically.
Yeah, even if you look at the history of the United States, we used to have much stronger antitrust laws.
And if we actually maintained those, maybe it would... If we actually maintain those, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But the accumulation of capital at the expense of, by exploiting resources... Again, exploiting is bad, generally bad, allows them to accrue enough money to buy their way into politicians unless we are very strict with them. And they're going to be fighting against that. And they're going to be putting out propaganda so that people will also fight against it. And then it ends up leading to them basically owning the government. And then we end up where we are.
Here's the thing, Veldrain.
You're right. Every form of governing has a good and bad side. Capitalism just enables its bad side a lot more than it enables anything good.
Well, here's the thing, Veldrain. people in European countries wind up being happier and living longer. If you look at what happened in South America, where countries out there wound up being democratic and largely voting for more progressive socialist policies, they also wound up having their life expectancies and overall happiness go up. I'm not talking Venezuela, I'm talking about Brazil, I'm talking about Argentina, and I'm talking about Bolivia. Those are countries out there. Like Venezuela is a Marxist-Leninist state. They're not democratic. I'm talking about Venezuela, or I'm talking about Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia, where that largely happened, and Paraguay under the brief rule of Fernando Lugo. Those are examples. Those are absolutely counterpoints. I think that South America and Europe, or people in South America and Europe, are usually avoiding many of the problems that the United States has, and they're not doing as poorly as us in terms of just like human misery. And I think they're doing a lot better than us in a lot of regards. I think that I don't necessarily like what the current president of Brazil is doing, and I think that he's largely moving the country in a horrifying direction in terms of destroying the Amazon and enabling police brutality, etc. Those are examples of. I think that he's largely. I think that Silva, on the other hand, really did a lot more good for Brazil, and those are. I think that when I look at which countries out there largely have a better forms of human development, I think that's good. I think that Angela Merkel still describes herself as a conservative in Germany, where the Overton window is much further to the left, but Germany is offering people free 4-year college now. That makes a difference. That means that people are likely to wind up getting better jobs, and they don't have to spend every single cent they make on rent. That's so much better than having to, because you really can't own a 2-bedroom and have a dead-end job, and you can't do that. You can't have a 1-bedroom and still go to college, so you can't get a degree, and you can't really have kids. You're looking at things out there where, unless you really want to take out a ton of student loans, in which case, if you fail out of college, you are completely fucked, and you're going to have to default on those loans and ruin your credit rating, which means that it'll be that much harder to find an apartment, to get a car, to get approved for even a new credit card, to get approved for a credit card. Those are things out there that'll affect the interest rates on your credit card. To get multiple lines of credit, those things are going to become a lot harder.
And it's made up anyway to make it harder for poor people to do things.
Yeah, it's
literally, we made it up in '85. Like, sure, let's make it that much harder for poor people to do stuff.
Yeah, you're looking at the fact that things are unaffordable. You're going to have you can't really afford. You can't really, in this economy, you can't really do things out there because of the way things are set up. You can't really get a job. That'll you can't get the type of job out there that will actually allow
entry level position, masters required.
Yeah,
paying minimum wage.
Yeah, it's those types of things that other countries, even if they describe themselves as being capitalist, still don't do. It's the fact that the United States fails in a lot of it fails in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that I agree with everything on the left. No, I think that sometimes people want that's some things that activists want to accomplish may not necessarily be workable or may not necessarily be the best ideas. But yeah, the housing market scares you. Well, that's a.
I live in Kansas.
Here's the thing.
Supposedly, we should have cheap housing out here, right? Because we're fucking in the middle of nowhere. In order to get a house under 6 figures, it basically has to be, like, destroyed. That's ridiculous.
Nowhere in this country can you find a decent 2-bedroom apartment or condo that's affordable on a minimum wage job. You can get a 1-bedroom or a studio, but you really can't at the same time, because of the way that housing regulations work. There's a maximum
generation is going to make the change. The current generation is aware, but that seems to be the extent. The current generation are still fucking kids.
Yeah.
You know who's mostly in power? Like, which generation is mostly in power? Boomers. Still. That's part of the reason why shit isn't changing. You'll notice younger politicians tend to be more radical, like, or at least the Democrats, like more progressive, like actually want to fix shit, but they're constantly being pushed back by the old school boomer Democrats who are like scared of change. Like,
here's the thing. The boomers themselves can't really retire because of the way the system is set up. We've gutted a huge chunk of the safety net.
They did it though. They caused that.
Yeah, they caused it, but now they can't retire. It's the ones in power, but at the same time, people's parents wind up not being able to retire, and you don't have the type of idyllic retirement that the greatest generation and the silent generation got. You have an economy that doesn't really work for anybody at this point.
So speaking,
except billionaires. Billionaires benefit. Everybody else is. There's only a few hundred of them in the country, and everybody else is going through shit.
So as fun as this is, and it is fun, it's been 2 hours. I think maybe we should probably get to wrap it up.
Cuba Libre, by the way.
Cuba Libre. I guess that's it.